Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Title Scoop. So we are still on escrow topics. I think we have probably 2 weeks left, this week and next, and then hopefully we'll get on to more title topics, unless of course someone comes up with an escrow topic that I've missed. So definitely let me know if there's something you want me to address. So the next 2 weeks we're going to talk pretty broadly about some accounting concepts. We'll review receipts, disbursements, balancing files, who gets paid, positive pay, and then recons. So let's start with receipts. Receipts are also known as incoming funds. These can take many shapes and really depends on your state what is and isn't acceptable. So we haven't talked at length about good funds because it's so state specific. So first off, I'm going to say know your good funds law in your state. If you don't know your good funds law, please call your underwriter. We are happy to send that information to you, but you really need to know what is and isn't acceptable, how much you can take, what forms you can take, so just so that you are abiding by the law. So there are some exceptions to good funds law, and again, that's state specific. So that would have to do more with like broker, escrow checks, attorney checks, lender funds, things like that. So again, you really need to read your state law to know what those are. So if the amount is less than is required by your good funds law, you might be able to accept a personal check. Now, I will say that's often a business decision, and some companies that I've worked at have been fine with personal checks under a certain amount, and some have said, absolutely not, we won't accept anything other than what is in the good funds form, which is likely a wire or cashier's check. You also could potentially accept cash for your incoming funds or your receipts. I would never suggest accepting cash. One, because there's IRS rules that have to be followed if you're accepting cash. And here's a fun fact. The federal law actually prohibits you from making copies of cash. So, we like to have copies of every incoming fund that we have. We couldn't actually do that with cash because if you make a copy, you could be breaking the law. So that's a fun fact. So let's move on to disbursements, which are also known as outgoing funds. So since we as the title company or the settlement agent are responsible for completing disbursements, we are going to be dispersing the files. And the settlement statement actually has language where they're actually approving that we disperse the file. If you're looking at a file ledger and it's of a closed file, you're going to see things that match. So your total receipts should equal the total amount of your disbursements. The names should match. And here's another thing that you need to know. No disbursements should be made unless all incoming funds have been received. So here's the new fun fact for disbursements. Files should not have a negative balance. You should never disperse funds if you don't have the money in the file and it's actually cleared. All right, so outgoing funds can also, they can also take different forms. So most commonly, we're going to be using a wire transfer or a title company check. And again, what I said earlier is everything's going to match. So your number on the settlement statement is the number that you're dispersing. And the seller listed is going to be the same on the settlement statement as on the seller's proceeds check as on the contract. It's not a different name. So if you've got Joey Martin and he's the seller and he says, oh, just send my proceeds to my LLC or my company, you can't just do that. Now, there might be a way, and if you get asked to do that, call your underwriter if you're not sure how to handle it, and we'll help walk you through what you need to do to make sure that you do it correctly. So here's a few best practices around disbursements. Have one employee input outgoing wires, and then have another employee review and approve the outgoing wires. And what that does, that prevents mistakes and then also fraud, because if one person's approving or submitting and approving, then potentially you could have fraud. Keep a copy of the wire confirmation with the Fed reference number in every file. That's just to prove that you actually did have it, you followed the procedures, and you have proof of that. If you're printing 2 checks, a best practice is to have one person print and another review and sign. Now, that's not always possible. Sometimes you'll also have 2 signatures. So there's different ways to do it, and it's all dependent on your company and what you feel is going to protect you from fraud and making sure that you have a best practice for that. And then the last thing is use positive pay. Now, we're not going to go into what that is today. We're going to talk about it next week, but I just want to make sure that you have that on your best practice list to at least look at and see if you want to do if you're not doing already. So here's just a really quick recap. Total of all receipts equals the total of all disbursements. Also, the incoming funds equal the outgoing funds. And if all of those things have happened, your file will be balanced. So there you go. A transaction will always show a balance at the end of $0. And if not, then you've got an issue. All right, so next week we will cover balancing the file ledger, who gets paid from closing, positive pay, and recons. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.